History textbooks told you about wars and treaties, but somehow missed the most fascinating parts. Hidden beneath familiar stereotypes are remarkable traditions that reveal extraordinary wisdom and innovation. These 10 surprising discoveries will completely transform how you understand America's true history. In a world obsessed with accumulating wealth, Native American tribes like the Lakota, Cree, and Blackfoot practiced something that would make modern financial advisors faint. They gave everything away. The giveaway ceremony wasn't just a casual donation. It was a profound cultural practice where people deliberately gave away their most precious possessions. The logic behind this tradition flips our modern understanding of wealth upside down. For these communities, true status wasn't measured by what you owned, but by what you could afford to give away. The most respected members weren't those with the biggest houses or the most horses. They were those who demonstrated the greatest generosity. During these ceremonies, participants would sometimes give away literally everything they owned. Blankets, tools, horses, weapons, nothing was off limits. The more valuable the item, the more honor bestowed upon the giver. These ceremonies served as a natural wealth redistribution system, ensuring resources circulated throughout the community rather than becoming concentrated in the hands of a few. This wasn't seen as a sacrifice, but as an honor. Your social standing actually rose with each possession you parted with, a concept that would baffle today's influencers posing with luxury cars on social media. The tradition reinforced core values like community responsibility and the understanding that possessions were temporary while relationships were permanent. When someone experienced hardship, they knew the community would support them, just as they had supported others during their own ceremonies. This practice continues in many Native American communities today, though adapted to modern contexts. Families still hold giveaway ceremonies at significant life events like graduations, weddings, or memorials, distributing gifts to honor achievements or remember loved ones. While most of us struggle to part with outgrown clothes during spring cleaning, these communities built an entire social structure around the principle of giving. Your bank account balance meant nothing if you weren't willing to share it. The giveaway ceremony reveals how deeply these communities valued emotional expression and connection over material wealth. This emotional openness wasn't limited to displays of generosity. It extended to how they processed more difficult feelings as well. When someone dies today, we often struggle to find the right words. We stumble through condolences, awkwardly pat shoulders, and whisper, "I'm sorry for your loss," before quickly changing the subject. Death makes us uncomfortable. But for Native Americans, grief wasn't something to hide. It was something to voice, loudly and beautifully. Their crying songs transformed mourning into a powerful art form that honored both the dead and the pain of those left behind. These weren't casual tunes hummed under breath. Crying songs were elaborate vocal expressions, often featuring haunting melodies that could pierce through the toughest emotional barriers. Family members would gather and sing these songs together, creating a shared experience of grief rather than suffering and isolation. What's remarkable is how these songs were preserved and passed down. Each family often had their own unique crying songs, handed down through generations like precious heirlooms. When tragedy struck, even young children knew exactly which melodies to call upon, songs their grandparents and great-grandparents had sung in times of loss. The lyrics themselves were raw and honest. While modern culture teaches us to say they're in a better place, or at least they're not suffering anymore, crying songs directly address the pain. The empty space at the dinner fire, the unfinished projects, the words left unsaid. Nothing was sugar-coated. One elder from the Lakota tribe described crying songs as turning pain into beauty without diminishing the pain. That's a level of emotional sophistication many modern therapists still strive to achieve with their clients. Studies have shown that societies with formalized grieving rituals often show better long-term emotional outcomes after significant losses. By giving grief a structure and a voice, these communities acknowledged something many of us forget, that processing pain requires expression, not suppression. I once attended a memorial where a descendant of the Apache tribe sang a crying song, and the room fell completely silent. No one moved, no phones buzzed. The raw emotion in her voice communicated more than any eulogy could have. It wasn't just sad, it was transcendent. While we shared emotions through song, the tribes of the Great Plains often expressed themselves physically as well. Ever wonder what sports looked like before multi-million-dollar contracts and instant replays? The Cherokee and Choctaw tribes had an answer: stickball, a game so intense it makes modern football look like a gentle game of tag. Stickball wasn't just a pastime, it was a cultural institution. Tribes used it to settle disputes between communities, train warriors, and entertain crowds that sometimes numbered in the thousands. Games could last from sunrise to sunset, and in some cases, continue for several days until one side finally claimed victory. The equipment was deceptively simple: wooden sticks with a small net or loop at the end, and a small ball made from deer hide stuffed with hair or moss. But don't let the basic gear fool you. There was nothing simple about how they played. Players couldn't touch the ball with their hands. Instead, they used their sticks to catch, carry, and throw it toward goals that could be anything from poles to rocks placed hundreds of yards apart. The field wasn't neatly marked with boundary lines. It might stretch across an entire valley, with natural features serving as landmarks. Rules? What rules? Tackling, body checking, and stick swinging were all fair game. In fact, one of the few consistent rules was that you couldn't complain about injuries. Getting hurt and continuing to play was seen as a badge of honor. Young men proved their toughness and readiness for battle through these games. Some matches carried serious stakes. Historical facts mention games where the losing tribe had to surrender territory or resources. Other games determined hunting rights for the coming season. It wasn't just sport, it was diplomacy through athletic competition. Women had their own version of stickball too, though these games received less documentation from European observers. They were reportedly just as competitive, with female players showing remarkable skill and toughness. The tradition continues today. Modern tournaments are held throughout the year in states like Mississippi, Oklahoma, and North Carolina, though with somewhat more safety precautions than their ancestors employed. I watched a match in Oklahoma once. Even with today's modified rules, the intensity was palpable. While stickball channeled physical energy into structured competition, other traditions focused on spiritual power. The ghost dance wasn't just another cultural tradition, it became the spark that ignited one of the most tragic episodes in American history. The movement began with a Paiute spiritual leader named Wovoka, who during a solar eclipse in 1889 had a powerful vision. In this vision, he saw a future where Native American lands would be restored, white settlers would disappear, and deceased ancestors would return to Earth. The key to bringing about this renewal? A specific dance performed with precise movements and songs. Word spread quickly across tribal nations. From Nevada to the Dakotas, desperate communities embraced this message of hope. By 1890, thousands of Native Americans were participating in ghost dance ceremonies, wearing special shirts they believed would protect them from bullets, a detail that particularly alarmed government officials. For tribes like the Lakota, who had endured decades of broken treaties, starvation, and cultural destruction, the ghost dance represented more than just spiritual practice. It offered psychological survival. Their population had plummeted from 25,000 to fewer than 3,000 in just 40 years. Their lands had been reduced by millions of acres. The buffalo herds that sustained their way of life had been deliberately destroyed. The U.S. government's response was swift and severe. Officials banned the ceremony outright, viewing it as a precursor to rebellion rather than a spiritual movement born of desperation. When Sitting Bull was killed during an attempt to arrest him for supporting the ghost dance, tensions escalated further. On December 29, 1890, the 7th Cavalry surrounded a Lakota camp at Wounded Knee Creek. What followed was a massacre that left more than 250 men, women, and children dead, all because officials feared a dance. The ban on Native American religious practices remained in effect until the American Indian Religious Freedom Act of 1978, meaning for nearly 90 years, the government legally prohibited Indigenous people from practicing their spiritual traditions. Let that sink in. A dance was considered so dangerous that it remained illegal until the late 1970s. Elements of the ghost dance survived underground, preserved by elders who passed down songs and movements in secret. Even today, modified versions continue in some communities, though many details remain private out of respect for their sacred nature. While the ghost dance represented a large-scale spiritual response to crisis, many Native American traditions focused on the day-to-day governance of community life. Please, let me finish. How many times have we heard this during heated debates? From family arguments to political showdowns, interruptions plague our conversations. Centuries before formal meeting protocols existed, Native American tribes solved this problem with an elegant solution: the talking stick. The concept was brilliantly simple. In tribal councils of the Iroquois, Lakota, and many other nations, a decorated stick or staff served as the sole permission to speak. Only the person holding this special object could address the group. Everyone else, regardless of status, wealth, or power, had to listen silently until the stick was passed to them. This wasn't just a quaint custom, it fundamentally transformed how decisions were made. With no interruptions allowed, speakers could fully develop their thoughts. Ideas weren't judged by who shouted loudest or spoke fastest, but by their actual merit. The talking stick created space for meaningful dialogue rather than competitive talking. These sticks themselves were often works of art. Many were carved with symbols representing tribal values like wisdom, respect, and courage. Some featured eagle feathers symbolizing the high perspective needed for good decisions, or fur from various animals representing different strengths like patience or bravery. Each tribe's talking stick reflected their specific cultural values and artistic traditions. The practice encouraged deeper listening skills too. Without the opportunity to immediately respond or rebut, council members had to truly absorb what was being said. They couldn't just wait for their turn to talk while formulating responses in their heads, a problem so common in modern conversations that we've practically turned it into an art form. Last year, I observed a community meeting that adopted this format. The difference was remarkable. People who normally dominated discussions became more thoughtful. Quieter voices emerged. Solutions appeared from unexpected sources. The talking stick's power to transform group dynamics remains as potent today as it was centuries ago. Perhaps most impressive was how this simple tool ensured that even unpopular opinions got a fair hearing. Everyone from the most respected elder to the youngest council member received the same opportunity to speak without interruption. In societies that valued consensus, this approach meant that decisions, once reached, had broad support because everyone felt their perspective had been considered. The talking stick has even made appearances in modern government negotiations during budget impasses. One such stick successfully reduced interruptions until someone apparently forgot the no-throwing rule and chipped a glass ornament. You know your meeting protocol has issues when adults need a "don't throw the stick" reminder. While tribal councils use talking sticks to navigate serious discussions indoors, many Native American nations also developed unique activities for the harsh winter months. Snow snake began as a practical hunting skill. Warriors needed to slide spears accurately across ice to take down games or defend territory. Over time, this survival technique evolved into a competitive sport that tested strength, skill, and craftsmanship. The snakes themselves were no simple toys. Made from hardwoods like hickory or maple, these polished wooden javelins ranged from 3 to 7 feet long. Each competitor carefully crafted their own, sanding them to glassy smoothness and treating them with secret waxes and oils to reduce friction. The best snow snakes became family treasures, passed down through generations. The game's premise was straightforward: throw your snake the farthest along a prepared track of snow. But the execution? That required incredible technique. Players used a whipping motion, gripping their snake at a precise point before releasing it with a snap of the wrist. The most skilled competitors could send their snakes gliding more than a mile, farther than many modern Olympic javelin throws. Tracks were community projects. Men from the village would pack down a long, shallow trough in the snow, then pour water to create an icy chute. Some tracks featured jumps and dips to add challenge, while others stretched straight for a mile or more. The best throws traveled so far that villages stationed spotters along the course to mark landing positions. Competitions often attracted hundreds of spectators. Betting was common, with entire villages sometimes wagering significant resources on their champions. The game required a unique blend of power and finesse. Throw too hard, and your snake would bounce out of the track. Not hard enough, and it wouldn't have the momentum to travel the distance. The finest snow snake throwers were revered athletes in their communities, their reputation spreading across tribal territories. Though less common today, snow snake tournaments still occur in communities across the northern United States and Canada. Modern players compete on tracks built to traditional specifications, using techniques virtually unchanged for centuries. Having witnessed one of these competitions in upstate New York, I can confirm it's as thrilling to watch as any mainstream sport, though considerably colder for spectators. While Snow Snake tested physical prowess in the winter months, other tribal traditions focused on deeper aspects of identity. The moment a baby is born today, one of the first questions people ask is, "What's the name?" Parents spend months deliberating over baby name books, family traditions, and celebrity trends. But in many Native American cultures, a child's true name wasn't something parents could decide before birth. It was something to be discovered over time. When babies were born in tribes like the Navajo, Apache, and Lakota, they often received temporary names or were simply called baby, little one, or similar terms of endearment. The real naming process was far more complex and carried deep cultural significance. A child's true name might come from many sources: a notable characteristic they displayed, an important event that coincided with their birth, an animal encounter, or a vision received by an elder. Names weren't chosen from a list, they emerged from life itself. In some tribes, children received their permanent names around age 12 or 13, marking their transition toward adulthood. The community would gather for a formal ceremony where elders bestowed a name that reflected the young person's emerging character. Runs with thunder wasn't a random poetic phrase. It might describe a child known for their swift movements during storms, capturing something essential about who they were. Names weren't static identifiers either. A person might earn additional names throughout their lifetime as they accomplished significant deeds or underwent transformative experiences. A young warrior might start as Quick Rabbit, reflecting their youthful speed, but later become Mountain Shield after protecting their village during a crucial battle. This practice created an incredibly individualized sense of identity. No two people had exactly the same combination of traits and experiences, so no two people carried exactly the same name. While the modern world has thousands of people named John Smith, traditional Native naming ensured everyone's identity was uniquely their own. The responsibility of naming often fell to respected elders, medicine people, or family members with special connections to spiritual traditions. These namers were believed to have the wisdom to see a person's true nature and future path. Some tribes had specific family members, like a maternal uncle, who held the right to name children. I once attended a modern naming ceremony where a teenager received her adult name after completing important cultural training. The pride on her face when the elder announced her new name to the community was unforgettable. Unlike the name on her school ID, this name represented who she was becoming, chosen specifically for her unique qualities. This tradition of earned names reflected a deep understanding that identity isn't fixed at birth but develops through experience and achievement. While modern parents ponder the impact of naming their child Apple or North, these traditional cultures created a naming system where your identity evolved alongside your personal growth. The concept of earning rather than simply receiving one's identity extended beyond names into other aspects of tribal culture. Most military traditions throughout history share one basic goal: defeat your enemy by killing them. But the Plains tribes of North America developed a radically different approach to warfare, one where the highest honor came not from taking a life, but from demonstrating courage through a dangerous act of restraint. This practice was called counting coup, and it flipped conventional warfare on its head. Rather than aiming to kill an enemy fighter, warriors of tribes like the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Crow would ride directly into danger with the goal of touching, yes, simply touching, an armed opponent with a special stick or hand, then escaping unharmed. Let that sink in. The most prestigious act on a battlefield wasn't shooting an arrow or swinging a weapon. It was getting close enough to tap someone and show that you could have killed them, but chose not to. The coup stick itself was typically a slender rod about 2 feet long, often decorated with eagle feathers representing previous successful coups. Some warriors carried small riding quirts that served the same purpose. To touch an enemy with this implement while they were actively fighting back required extraordinary horsemanship, timing, and nerves of steel. The honor system around counting coup was elaborate and precise. Different acts carried different levels of prestige. Touching an armed enemy was considered the most courageous act. Stealing an enemy's weapon or horse ranked next in honor. Taking an enemy shield or capturing a tethered horse near an enemy camp also earned significant respect. Warriors kept careful track of their coups, with each successful act adding to their reputation. At tribal gatherings, they would recount these deeds in detail, often displaying physical proof like coup sticks marked with notches or special patterns. Exaggerating or falsely claiming coups was considered deeply shameful and could destroy a warrior's standing in the community. The system created battlefield scenarios that would seem bizarre by European military standards. Historical accounts describe instances where warriors passed up easy kills to attempt the more honorable coup touch, sometimes putting themselves at considerable risk to achieve this distinction. What makes this tradition even more remarkable is how it potentially limited casualties in intertribal conflicts. By prioritizing demonstrations of bravery over body counts, these societies developed a form of ritualized warfare that satisfied cultural needs for proving courage and gaining status without necessarily resulting in mass casualties. Many historical records from early European observers note their confusion at this practice. One military officer wrote in his journal, "These Indians seem more interested in touching their enemies than killing them, which makes no sense to me." He failed to understand that in Plains culture, a warrior who could touch an enemy and escape had demonstrated far more skill than one who simply shot from a distance. While Plains tribes developed warfare into an elaborate point system based on courage rather than killing, other Native American traditions focused on other ways. Long before luxury spas offered $200 hot stone treatments, Native American tribes like the Lakota, Apache, and Anishinaabe had perfected the art of therapeutic sweating. The sweat lodge wasn't just a place to cleanse your pores. It was a sacred space where physical, mental, and spiritual purification converged. Basically, it was the original 3-in-1 body wash for your entire existence. The structure itself was deceptively simple, a small dome-shaped framework typically made of bent willow branches covered completely with animal hides, blankets, or tarps to create an airtight, pitch-black interior. What happened inside, however, was anything but a casual spa day. The ceremony began with heating stones, not just any rocks, but specific varieties chosen for their ability to withstand extreme heat without cracking or exploding. These grandfather stones were placed in a central fire until they glowed red hot, then carefully transferred into a pit in the center of the lodge. No thermostat to adjust here, just rocks that could melt your face off if handled incorrectly. Once participants entered and the entrance was sealed, water containing sacred herbs like sage, sweetgrass, or cedar was poured over the stones, instantly creating intense, purifying steam. The temperature would rapidly rise to levels that would make modern sauna enthusiasts reconsider their life choices, often exceeding 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Unlike modern spa experiences focused on relaxation, the sweat lodge demanded endurance. Sessions typically lasted for 4 rounds, with each round growing progressively more intense. While today we complained about 5 minutes in a hot car, participants willingly endured hours of extreme heat while singing, praying, and sometimes confronting their deepest issues. The darkness was essential to the experience, representing the womb of Mother Earth and forcing participants to turn inward rather than focusing on external distractions. Many people reported profound insights or visions during these ceremonies, proving that sometimes the best clarity comes when you literally can't see anything else. Today, authentic sweat lodge ceremonies continue in many communities, though they face challenges from both cultural appropriation and misunderstanding. Let's be clear, wrapping yourself in tinfoil in your backyard after watching a YouTube tutorial isn't quite the same thing. While the sweat lodge ceremony helped people communicate with the spiritual world through intense physical experience, other Native American groups developed methods to communicate across great physical distances in the material world. Long before text messages or walkie-talkies, several Native American tribes developed sophisticated whistling languages that allowed complex communication across vast distances. The Kickapoon tribes in the American Southwest didn't just use simple signals like modern hikers might use to indicate danger. They created entire linguistic systems that could convey specific information, warnings, stories, and even jokes through carefully modulated whistles. These whistle languages followed the tonal patterns of spoken language. By mimicking the pitch, rhythm, and stress patterns of normal speech, whistlers could encode messages that others trained in the system could decode. The human ear can detect whistles from significantly greater distances than voice, making this communication method effective across valleys or dense forests where visibility was limited. For hunters, the whistling language was invaluable. Verbal communication would have scared away prey, but whistles could be mistaken for bird calls while still allowing hunters to coordinate strategies. Warriors used the same advantage in battle, coordinating movements without revealing their positions. The complexity of these systems was remarkable. Users could convey not just basic concepts, but specific details about time, numbers, distances, and identities. Practiced whistlers could even include emotional content, urgency, humor, or solemnity through variations in their whistling style. Transmission of this skill required years of practice. Young people learned gradually, starting with basic signals and eventually mastering the subtle nuances that distinguished similar-sounding words. When Europeans banned many Native American cultural practices, whistling languages became tools of resistance. Communities could share news about government movements or coordinate gatherings without arousing suspicion, as the whistles resembled ordinary work songs or bird calls to untrained ears. Native American traditions reveal cultures that developed ingenious solutions to life's challenges. These 10 traditions only scratch the surface of the rich cultural heritage that existed across North America long before European contact.